Well, thank you so much for joining us, Rachel. I'm going to get started.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Today, I am so excited to have Rachel Hawkins joining us, the Peloton Moms Book Club, to discuss her most recent best-selling book, Reckless Girls. Let me get a few thank yous out of the way real quick, and then we will dive right in. First, thanks, Rachel, for giving us your time this evening and coming and chatting with us. Thank you to Jennifer Crowley for everything that she does behind the scenes. Thank you to all of the moms who have read Reckless Girls, who've loved it, recommended it inside the group, outside the group, and to all of the moms who are going to catch this later via recording because life happens and we know it. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Welcome,
Awesome.
Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, let me do a quick intro for you because I know sometimes it's awkward to introduce yourselves. Rachel Hawkins is the New York Times bestselling author of The Wife Upstairs and Reckless Girls, as well as multiple books for younger readers. Her work has been translated in over a dozen countries. She studied gender and sexuality in Victorian literature at Auburn University and currently lives in Alabama with her husband and child.
Yes, just the one.
Well, welcome to the Peloton Moms Book Club. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you so much.
For our members who may not have had the opportunity to read Reckless Girls yet, but or who are here because they loved The Wife Upstairs, tell us a little bit about Reckless Girls.
So Reckless Girls is the story of a 20-something named Lux McAllister who is living in Hawaii, working a series of dead-end jobs after she followed a boy to Hawaii. Who amongst us hasn't? He's working on boats. The plan was to sail around the world, but they've sort of gotten stuck there until they meet these two really interesting young women, Brittany and Amma, who hire Lux's boyfriend, Nico, to sail them to a deserted island that has a somewhat dark history, we'll say, of people going missing, ships wrecking, that sort of thing. But they want to go there and see it. When they arrive at Monroe Island, there's another couple already anchored there. And they become friends with this other couple. It's all fun and games and beach parties and skinny dipping and all those good things until it turns out that not only does the island have its secrets, but so do the fellow travelers. And then it all kicks off as it goes.
Yes, it definitely went off the rails there for a bit. I was here for it. Well, so I believe that before you wrote your adult novels, you had started off with young adult books. Tell us a bit about those young adult books and what prompted the change into adult fiction.
Yeah, I wrote YA for about 10 years, really. I had been a high school English teacher in like the sort of it wasn't even like post, we were still sort of in the Twilight boom. So it was like that mid 2000s. And because I was teaching high school English, I was always asking my students what they were reading. And I hadn't like really been reading young adult stuff. I was like in my late 20s, I guess, at the time. And I mean, I'd read like Harry Potter and stuff like that, obviously, but I didn't really kind of know how cool YA had gotten. Because when I was a kid, like you read like Babysitter's Club, Sweet Valley High, Judy Blume, then it was over for you. you went straight to the adult section. So that kind of got me then into writing YA. So my first book is a book called Xhex that came out in 2010. And it was sort of paranormal. There was romance, that it was funny, that kind of thing. I wrote 4 books actually in that series. Then I went on to write a series with a book called Rebel Belle that was about a sort of Southern debutante type who gets superpowers. I also wrote 2 books for middle grade readers, Journey's End and Ruby and Olivia, that were sort of like gently spooky for the littler kids. And then I wrote a duology called the Royals Books that had Prince Charming and Her Royal Highness, which were like romantic comedies about royalty. So yeah, like I think that like between all those books and that sort of decade working in young adult, I just kind of ran out of ideas, basically. I sort of felt like I had written everything that I wanted to write in that genre. And so again, it was like right at 10 years. I was 30 when my first YA novel came out. I was like turning 40. It just felt like a really good time to make a change. Like I love a kind of bookend situation. And so, yeah, and just, I'm a big believer in following your gut when it comes to writing. And all the ideas that I was having were for adult books. So it was like, okay, well, that's clearly like what my brain wants to do, what my heart wants to do. So let's do that. So yeah, it just felt like the right time to move into something new.
Fantastic. Were the publishers the same for your YA and your adult novels, or?
No, I joke that I think there's like 5 big publishers now, and I think I've had like all of them at some point. So, because I was with Disney Hyperion and Penguin Random House with my YA, and now I'm with St. Martin's, which is Macmillan, for the thrillers, and then I also write romance under a pen name for Avon, so which is HarperCollins. So yeah, I'm all over the place.
Definitely. Well, so last year, The Wife Upstairs blew up in the Peloton Moms Book Club. I mean, I still see people floating around in the group. And so I read Jane Eyre, but I didn't really feel like you needed to have read the original source material to appreciate your version.
Right.
So what prompted you to want to do a reimagining of a classic, and why Jane Eyre?
It's really interesting. Like, that book is such a great example of how like this business is very weird and it can work in all kinds of different ways. This was actually something that came to me from a publisher that was looking for somebody to write this kind of book, and contacted my agent and was like, do you have anybody that might want to do like a modern retelling of Jane Eyre? And my agent, who I've been with since 2008, so she knows my heart, even though I had never written adult, I'd never written thrillers. I don't think we'd ever talked about Jane Eyre, even though I had studied it a lot in school. She was like, do you want to give this a go? And I said, yeah, there was something about it that just seemed so cool to me. And I mean, it was only like a paragraph or two of like what it would be. I mean, they were really just like, it's Jane Eyre, but in modern times. And she's like in a panic room, not in the attic. And I just thought that was like such a weird but fun thing to play with. But what's really kind of funny about it too is that, I got that idea, and, like I said, I told my agent, I basically was like auditioning for it, which was also like completely different from how I'd ever written a book before. So I wrote, 10 pages and emailed it off to them to see if they liked what I did with it. And I almost didn't do it. Like at the last minute, I got kind of timid about it. I was sort of, I had like that imposter syndrome thing of like, oh, who am I kidding? Like, I don't write thrillers. I don't write adult. They're not going to like what I do. And I really had to like shut that voice up. And the way that I did it was that I actually, if you've read The Wife Upstairs, there's a line in the book that a character says that's a takeoff on the famous "Reader, I Married Him." Well, this character says something else instead of married. Another verb is used, we'll say. And I ended the sample with that because I was like, you know what, I'm just going to go really big on this. And if they don't like it, then I'm not the person to write this or whatever. But they did. So, and then we really worked together to kind of build the book. Like I said, when I first got the sort of treatment for it, it was really just barely sketched out. So, they let me really come up with a lot of the backstory stuff. They let me set it in Alabama, because I was kind of like, let's not do like generic Connecticut. I got some stuff to say about like my home state. So let me dig in there. No offense, Connecticut, you're a beautiful state. So yeah, it was a really weird process. But that was one of the things, I'm glad that you mentioned that you didn't feel like you had to have read Jane Eyre, because I was like, this book only works if people who read Jane Eyre and loved it enjoy the little Easter eggs and things. But if you should never have to have like done homework before you read a book just for fun. So it needed to stand on its own, even if you didn't. And so if you have read Jane Eyre, then like I said, those are little fun Easter eggs. But if you haven't, it doesn't matter. You can still enjoy it.
Definitely. And when it comes up in the group, we do talk about, well, did you know it was a reimagining or a retelling of Jane Eyre? And it blows people's mind to be like, oh my gosh, if like they didn't get it before, then maybe they get it afterwards, or then maybe they want to go read the classics, and then you're just kind of reintroducing the classic, which is always nice.
Yeah, which is always fun. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, so in addition to Reckless Girls and The Wife Upstairs, you threw everyone a curveball and published the Xhex under the pseudonym Erin Sterling this past fall, which I also loved.
Thank you.
Give me all things fall and witchy any time of the year. So what prompted the deviation into the romance genre and the accompanying name change?
Yeah, so I've always been a huge romance fan. I like, I think a lot of people, I read in a lot of different genres. I read thrillers, I love history books, I love historical fiction, I love all kinds of stuff. But romance is like my true love. You know, that's like the thing that I really like clung to when I was like 13 or so. Those were the books that I loved. I'd always kind of thought when I was younger, when I thought about being a writer, I'd always kind of thought I would be a romance writer, just because again, that was really where my heart was. So yeah, the Xhex kind of came out of that. I had sold The Wife Upstairs and it was done, like I'd edited it and all that. So it was kind of off my plate at the time. And it was fall, it was, or like August, September. And I just really sat down and was like, I just want to write something that makes me happy. And so I'm going to write, I'd wanted to write a rom-com for a long time, but I had all these kind of false starts because I didn't feel like I was bringing anything all that special to the table. There are so many good romance novels out there right now. And then I'm like, oh, well, I started my career in paranormal romance, but for teens. Let's just age it all up. I mean, my readers now are like in their 20s and 30s, those kids that started with me in 2010. So yeah, it was really just to sort of make myself happy. I sprung it on my agent, actually. Like, I sent her an email that was like, I've got 100 pages of this thing and I don't know if it's a thing, but do you want to see it? And then it all kind of went from there. So yeah, and I thought the same thing. I love fall. I love witchy stuff. I'm also a sucker for like a Christmas romance. I'll watch any of the Netflix Christmas romance movies. The Hallmark ones I tend to burn out on very quickly, but I get very excited at like the beginning of that. But I've always kind of been like, Halloween is a like romantic holiday in its own right. Like it's spooky. The weather is really nice. There's all these kinds of like hay rides and corn mazes and that kind of thing to play with. So yeah, I really wanted to like write a book to make myself happy, and now I'm like so gratified because it's like obviously a bunch of people sort of had the same thought because like there were so many good paranormal rom-coms out this year, and I was like, oh yeah, it's a thing, it's a trend now. So yeah. And and then the name change is just because like the books are so different. If you read Reckless Girls and then the Xhex, it's probably weird to know that I wrote them within like 6 months of each other. So it's good not to cross the streams on those, I think.
Well, that was just another thing, like, when people started talking about The Wife Upstairs, we referenced that, the Jane Eyre inspiration. And then when people started talking about the Xhex, we also got to say, well, did you know that she also wrote The Wife Upstairs? It was, to me, it's like great marketing. I understand why you would choose a different pen name, but I loved it. So
yeah. And I'm really open about it, like on Twitter and stuff like that. I never wanted to be secretive about it. It just felt better to kind of, like I said, keep them apart. And then it's fun, because you can surprise people with it.
Mm-hmm. Talking about the Hallmark movies and the Netflix movies, I definitely would love to see more Halloween-y Netflix, Hallmark movies, Lifetime movies, whatever. I mean, Hocus Pocus, not a romance, but that movie is huge and it's set around that holiday. So like, let's do some more things around.
Yeah, there is such a market for it, and like Netflix and Hallmark really need to like step it up on that.
Definitely. So circling back to Reckless Girls, we're always curious about an author's writing process. Tell us a bit about how you wrote this book. Did you plot it all out, write it in a linear fashion? And did you always know where it was going to end up?
Yeah, this one was kind of a weird little beast because this was very different than from Wife Upstairs. This was 100% me and my idea and something I'd always wanted to write, a boat murder book. I've always, had that on the bucket list. So with this one though, yeah, I did plot it all out. I was not like a plotter really before I started writing thrillers, and then writing thrillers quickly teaches you that you should really have a pretty solid outline. But my outlines are nothing formal. It's not like the scary stuff that I used to teach in high school English with like the Roman numerals and the capital letters. It's none of that. I literally just write what happens in sort of the most simplistic terms. It usually ends up being about a 10-page document that's just paragraph after paragraph of like, then this happens and this and this. It takes me a couple of months to work on usually, because I like for books to have what I call cooking time. I like to sit with them for a while. I like to sort of turn an idea over in my head, kind of, see what I really want to do with it. I'm making the playlists, I'm on Pinterest, all those good things, before I really sit down and do that outline. And then from there, because I have this kind of Bible of like, okay, these are the things that are happening, that lets me write mostly out of order, which I prefer to do. I like to, especially when I'm just starting out a book, I like to go ahead and get the scenes down that I already really know, that I'm already have been like thinking about, I'm really excited about writing. Because that kind of gets the momentum going right away. Like you don't want to like start your first chapter and be like, well, is this really where I want to start the book? And then the next thing you know, like it's 5 weeks later and you still are on chapter 1. So for me, it's really helpful to sort of do them out of order like that. And then because if you've got that outline, you can kind of look back and be like, wait, what parts am I missing? What haven't I kind of? But I also too try to keep it really loose, I guess, and organic. Like in Reckless Girls, the original outline, the sort of crimey bits of it, as it were, like what the bad guys and all that were doing, was much more laid out, and it was much more methodical and planned. And the deeper I got into the draft, and then the more I edited it with my editor, we both started talking about how like that wasn't really working for us. And I sort of liked the idea more that like, yeah, there may have been some like nefarious planning, but really it's this combination of people on this island. Like none of this stuff would have happened had you not had this combination of personalities. That to me is like a little more interesting than like, we're coming over here to do villain things, So yeah, it definitely evolved a lot in the drafting of it and the editing.
So with Reckless Girls, or you can speak to all of your novels if it kind of follows suit, but you have what we get to read, the final version. How much do you leave on the cutting room floor, or do you have a pretty solid first draft and not much changes, or it varies and some things are just like take a 180? How does that work for you?
Yeah, well, it's really funny. I write really short first drafts. So like nothing ever gets left on the cutting room floor for the most part. Things get added in. But that's the easiest thing for me. And I think it comes out of writing YA, which were shorter books to begin with for the most part. So I like just a really 50,000 word draft, which is like barely 200 pages, like just really tight. Because that way I feel like I'm handing my editor, like, here's the skeleton of the book. And now we're going to find out where to put things, what it's wearing, all that kind of stuff. But right now, here's the basic bones of the thing. So yeah, they do change a good deal just because they do, like I said, I add, 20, 30,000 more. I add almost the whole book all over again in edits. So, but that, like I said, that's always really worked for me. Just because again, I like having, I wouldn't know what to do if I had to cut a bunch of stuff. I really just like adding. And it also really helps me be, my books are my books are still fairly on the short side for adult thrillers, but people seem to like that because I think something like this, especially with Reckless Girls, the pace to me was so important. Like we never wanted to sacrifice that feeling of tension mounting, of the island really closing in. And so, yeah, so that sort of helps me with that. Like it helps me be the most effective I can be as I go through edits.
Well, it's funny you talked about pacing. One of my favorite things to ask thriller authors who come and visit with us is I enjoy thrillers, but I read all of the genres. And I think that one of the most important things in a thriller is pacing. So what would you say is the secret to holding and maintaining suspense throughout your novels? Is it, the alternating perspectives? Is it time shifting, or is it something else entirely? Or
Yeah, I think, one of the things is that like I just really, really keep it in mind as I'm drafting. And so that way I'm not kind of getting really bogged down, I guess. Like it's always at the forefront of my mind. Like, is this moving things forward in a way that feels satisfying to the reader and that is tightening the screws a little bit? So that's like the main thing. And I think as long as you sort of keep that in mind, like you find the ways to introduce that sort of tension. Because then you're always like, if there is like a scene, on the beach, you're like, oh, don't forget though, the jungle's right behind them. You should maybe mention the jungle and that it's shadowy and that kind of thing. And that sort of, those atmospherics can really help. I also really think I was doing another one of these with a British thriller writer called Lucy Clark, whose books I really love. And she said that she always spends a lot of time thinking about like the last sentence of a chapter. And I do too. I was like, oh yeah, that's, I'd never really thought about it like that succinctly, but yeah, so that you have a kind of a hook, that the reader wants to be like, okay, well now what? That sort of thing. And yeah, and I think that in my books, especially because they do sort of play around with time and perspective, that can kind of help as well. Because one of the things that's especially fun in Reckless Girls is that the audience or the readers are aware pretty early on that characters are lying because they can see into their past and they're like, wait, that's not lining up with what I just heard them say to these people. And so things like that kind of also really help.
Yeah. Was the title always Reckless Girls?
No, I am terrible at titles. For the longest time, this was literally boatmurder.doc on my computer. My editor and I called it Boat Murder when we sent it back and forth. And then finally, I had to give it a title just to sort of turn it in. And I went with Over My Head, which I always absolutely hated. And I like said that to her. I was like, I don't like it. The personal pronoun bothers me. And it was actually my editor's boss who read the draft and was like, I think we should call it Reckless Girls. And I immediately really liked that. I was like, oh no, that's fun. That's kind of sexy. And it's, it's very apt thematically for what everybody's going through. So yeah, I was really pleased with that.
Yeah, when I was reading the book, I was like, okay, but where's the title tying in? And then at the end, I was like, well, yeah, okay.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
So when I was reading Reckless Girls, I was also reading it alongside a few of my friends, and we all agreed that we got strong the beach vibes, Leonardo DiCaprio's movie, and then a bit of The Lord of the Flies, even though, you have a piggy reference in the book, and you're like, this isn't Lord of the Flies. I'm like, but is it?
Yeah.
And then, but part of the Amazon blurb said, with its island gothic sensibility, sexy suspense, and spine-tingling reimagining of an Agatha Christie classic, Reckless Girls will wreck you. And I was like, well, is this a reimagining of an Agatha Christie classic? And if so, which one? Or
yeah, I definitely think like they use that because of The Wife Upstairs. So, like, which was obviously a reimagining of a classic. This one is not nearly as direct. There are elements that are a sort of winking nod to, and then there were none. Which anytime I think you've got like a bunch of people like on an island, you sort of have that feel, and that's that sort of idea of like people sort of being picked off and like whose motives are. So like there are elements of, and then there were none in there. But actually the biggest influence on this book is a true crime book that I read when I was like 12 or 13 called And the Sea Will Tell, which is quite the title. It was written by Vincent Bugliosi, who wrote Helter Skelter about the Manson murders, which is like his famous book. But he also wrote this book, And the Sea Will Tell, that was about the true story of two couples who sailed off from different spots, one from Hawaii, one from San Diego, to a atoll in the South Pacific called Palmyra. And one couple came back and one didn't. And so it was like, what happened between these two very different people or pairs? It's a fascinating book, and I used a lot of the descriptions of Palmyra in it to sort of help me kind of picture what I wanted Monroe to look like.
Well, speaking of couples, in this book, we've got Lux and Nico. And first off, I love the name Lux. I was just immediately captivated by her, just by her name.
Yeah,
And then,
it's a good name. It's one that like I got from the Virgin Suicides, which Lux, it's very meta. She tells them she's named after it, and she is technically, both in the book and without. Yeah, so it's a good name though. It should make a comeback.
it just might after this book
Yeah,
and
who
everything.
knows?
So let's just talk about a little bit about their relationship. They're the way they meet in California, and then they go off to Hawaii together, and they're just kind of living that vagabond life, even though Nico doesn't really have to be living that sort of life. Let's just talk a little bit about how their relationship helps to drive the story.
Yeah, that was like one of the sort of key relationships when I was first drafting the book, or first kind of coming up with the idea, that I sort of wanted to explore. A lot of this book is sort of about the haves and the have-nots. And so I always knew that I wanted Nico to be a rich kid playing at, the sort of bohemian life. I have definitely known kids like that. I'll never forget meeting this girl that like she worked at a vineyard, and I was like, that's so cool. And like she did it for like 3 months because she had a trust fund. So she didn't need to work for a living. So she would just go find these like that, were hard work. I mean, working in this vineyard, she was like literally picking grapes. It wasn't, easy, but she could just leave if she was tired of it, And so I was really sort of thinking of that sort of idea when it came to Nico. And I liked the idea too of exploring the ways in which I think especially women, and especially when we're young, can kind of hitch our dreams to a man and to his dream. Like, Lux feels so sort of rudderless, no pun intended, that, it's easy for her to just be like, yes, this is also what I want, but is it, and I thought that was an interesting thing to explore, especially since I was using Lux to say a lot of things about grief as well, and the way that grief can really rattle you and make you, like I said, where she starts out, I think, in a fairly weak position. She's just sort of following where Nico leads. So it was really interesting to sort of track her evolution through the book as well. And Nico was really useful for that.
Mm-hmm. He was. And then so when Amma and Brittany show up and they're like, oh, let's go to this weird island. We've heard a lot of creepy things about it. And I'm like, you're in Hawaii. You're already in
You're
paradise.
already on a cool island. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And now you want to go to this creepy deserted island? I was like, well, I was once young, but I was not young and dumb, apparently.
Yeah.
That this did not sound appealing to me. But
no, to me either. No.
Get there, we're introduced to Jake and Eliza,
yeah.
They're on their beautiful catamaran, and we're at the island of Monroe, and it looks so pretty, and it sounds just like a little paradise. But then creepy things start to happen, and I feel like I use the word atmospheric a lot when I talk about books, but I mean, it was a very atmospheric book, and it felt like Monroe Island was like its own character in the book.
Yeah. And that was really important to both my editor and I as we were working on it, that, it needed to feel, and it was actually her idea to put in those kind of little bits about the island, the emails, and she was like, can we get some more information, about the place, to sort of like really mythologize it so that it feels like, and one of my favorite things is when people tweet me and they're like, I Googled it, but there's nothing. And I'm like, well, yeah, because I made it up. It's not real. Mm-hmm. So it makes me so happy when people like really twig into that like, yeah, the island is definitely a character in its own right. Because we talked too about this book being, The Wife Upstairs obviously has this kind of Southern Gothic-y feel to it. And we wanted to sort of still bring the Gothic into this. And so one of the ways that we did that was we were like, let's look at the island as though it's a haunted house, like basically. So that was sort of, again, always at the forefront of our minds.
Mhm. Well, we talked about this. Well, you know what? We already answered that question. I'll move on. So I did immersive reading when I was doing Reckless Girls. I was listening to the audio and I was reading it digitally. And I got to say that I think that Barry Krennic
Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure either. Yeah.
She did a fantastic job with the accents and the overall narration. And so then I went and because I didn't do the audiobooks for the other two, the Wife Upstairs, Xhex, but so you had different narrators for each book. Are you involved in picking the narrator, or what can you tell us
Yeah,
about?
to some degree. Yeah, to some degree. They send me an email with like audio auditions, basically with like 2 or 3 people usually. And then I listen to them and, try to feel out who feels the best. It can be hard because sometimes they don't send you an audition of them like reading your book. They're just like, here's a clip of something they've already done. But with Reckless Girls, they did send a clip because one of the things was, I always joke like, oh, it's so easy to write like, and he's Australian and she's British and they're from the South or whatever. And then you don't think about the poor actor that's got to like be able to do all those accents. In fact, with the Xhex, with the audiobook, I had picked the narrator based on something else she did. And then when they got in the studio, she was like, oh, I can't do a Welsh accent and then, so they emailed me and they were like, she can't do Welsh. And I was like, she can just do a sort of neutral thing and it's fine. But so with this one though, I actually got to hear, and the other actress who read for it also did a fabulous job, but Barry's ability to slide between accents really easily was just really impressive to me as someone who can't do an accent for anything in this world. I just thought like she especially was really good with Jake, who is sort of a slippery character in a lot of ways. And I just really liked how she read him. Like he was coming across, the way that I meant for him to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think she did a great job. So
yeah, they're so talented. I mean, like that, it's really, it's amazing what they can do.
So it seems to me that you are a bit of a book of the month darling. All of your adult novels have been chosen for this very popular subscription box.
Yeah.
So what is your secret?
I wish I knew, because then I would have them all in there forever. I got very, very lucky in that part of it is like the book of the month, like submission process is like slightly secretive and, they do their own thing. But books are submitted to them, obviously, like publishers are like, hi, just, in case you want to try this. I'm very lucky in that my agent like understood like before book of the month had really taken off as much as it has. She was kind of like on the like forefront of it. She was like, wait, this is a thing. And so she was paying attention to it and sort of like very good at like getting her books in front of them and making sure that publishers were keeping them in mind for submissions and things like that. So yeah, it's that I think is a big part of it. It's just, and again, just sort of luck. I was also really fortunate because when they picked The Wife Upstairs, they picked it early. So it was a December release for them where the book itself came out in January. And that kind of gave that book a lot of legs, basically, because people got excited about an early, to have it before everybody else. So it sold very well through them. And I think like that also helps, when they're like, okay, people like her stuff. So, so I've been really, really fortunate with it, but yeah, I'm slightly in the dark and all that as well.
Well, are there any TV movie development things associated with any of the 3 books yet? How the rights been bought or?
Yeah. The Wife Upstairs has been optioned as a series for a streamer. So hopefully I'll get to talk about that soon. And Reckless Girls has been optioned by an amazing production company. The producers actually just got nominated for a Best Picture Oscar this week, or last week. So I'm really excited that they liked Reckless Girls. And yeah, so those kind of things are happening. There's some sort of, stuff with the Xhex, but it's not quite as concrete as these other 2 things. So yeah, fingers crossed. I mean, I've been in this business a long time, so I know that you can get all these exciting things and then they just disappear into the wind.
Yeah.
But yeah, but fingers crossed that not this time. So
definitely, we'd love to see it on any version of the screen. My son is coming home. So
yeah.
we have a lot of aspiring writers in the group, and we always like to ask, do you have any advice or tips for members that are mulling over the idea of writing a book?
Yeah, okay, absolutely. The biggest thing that I always say to any writer, it was advice I used to give to like young writers, but it's for writers of all age, is be kind to yourself. Like, don't like come to your computer or your notebook or your tablet or wherever you want to write with this idea of like, oh, it's not good enough. Oh, I'm not good enough or whatever. You've got to get past that and like, you're fine. Like write the story you want to write. The other thing is to remember that like writing is hard. All of us who do it for a living would tell you that I used to always think when I was trying to write a book before I'd ever finished one, when I'd get to like the middle and I was like, oh, I'm bored. Oh, okay, it's just not a good book. Nope, that's just writing. You sort of push through. And the other thing is always like be a sponge, like really pay attention to the things that resonate with you, TV shows, songs, other books, movies, whatever. The things that like you're like, oh, I really like that, or you really want to rewatch it or re-listen to it or anything like that. I always say like that's where like your sort of writer brain is living. So pay attention to that because like, Reckless Girls, like I said, I've been wanting to write since I was 12. And I know that because I was so drawn to anything with like people being murdered on boats, like the movie Dead Calm and The Beach and that true crime book I was talking about. So I paid attention to that. Okay. Like this is obviously a story I want to tell. So yeah, that's one of my biggest pieces of advice because so many people try to sort of write. They're like, well, maybe this seems popular. I'll try that. That'll never work. Write the book that only you can write,
Are there any?
I've got a teenager like screaming at video games in the other room. We're good.
He just got home from soccer. So are there any details that you can share with us about what you're currently working on and what the timeline is associated with that?
Yeah, so in September, the companion novel to the Xhex, The Kiss Curse, comes out. And that, if you've read the Xhex, that follows Gwen, Vivi's cousin, and Wells, Reese's brother. They spark interestingly. And then in January, so of 2023, I just finished the final round of edits for it. Is my next thriller. It doesn't have a title yet that's sort of official, but it's very fun. It's two women who were lifelong best friends go to Italy together for a vacation. They're both writers, but in very different ways. One writes like cozy mysteries. One is like Glennon Doyle, basically. She's like a self-help queen. And they stay at a villa where in the 1970s, a very famous murder happened that involved writers and rock stars. And it was all very scandalous. And the longer the two ladies in our time stay there, the more they begin to learn things about the murder that happened in the 70s. And it might have some echoes in their relationship. So it's very fun. I jokingly say that it's like Daisy Jones and the Six, but there's murder. So yeah, it sounds like something.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we would read. We love Daisy Jones Six, and so throw in some murder.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we did have one spoiler question come in, and I wanted to tack that on at the end.
Yes,
so
yes. Spoilers.
For anybody who wants to mute it for a minute, we're gonna get to one little nitty gritty detail with Rachel. So someone had asked, and we all read the book and without knowing where it's going to end up at the end. So then you get to the end and you're like, well, wait a minute, how did something happen? It's hard to go back.
Yeah, gotcha.
And you might even know where this is going, but one of the moms wanted to know how Emma didn't really recognize Eliza. Or did she, and we just didn't put it together at the time? Or what little nugget did you lay?
Yeah, she does. Yeah, she absolutely knows that that's who that is. And I wanted to be like really subtle with it. And maybe I was a little too subtle. That's why she's mad when they get there. When they first get there, when she sees them, you know, she makes the excuse of like, oh, I just really wanted it to just be us. So no, she absolutely knows. And then she knows that something weird is up. She's just not sure what. But due to her guilt about all things with Brittany and what she's been pulling on Brittany, she doesn't say anything because she doesn't want to sort of blow up whatever. And again, you know, at that point too in the story, you know, Amma doesn't like Chloe / Eliza at all, and she has not liked her, and she has thought she was bad news, but she hadn't been too bad news, you know what I mean? So it was almost like my read for, or what I was thinking with Amma, is that she's just it doesn't seem worth it to like make a scene out of it in front of Nico and Lux and all that, and she's like, whatever, this is just more of, you know, her bullshit, so I'll just, you know, I'll just go along with it and it'll be fine, and then we'll leave here in 2 weeks, you know. So yeah, that's where Amma's coming from. But yeah, I probably should have gone a little harder on, or at least had Amma maybe, she does say some things before she falls off the boat. But yeah, so she does, but she absolutely does recognize her, and she does have suspicions as to what is happening with this crazy chick now. She just doesn't want to voice them and blow up this thing that Brittany really wants to do.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And I figured there was a reasoning. So it's really wonderful to hear you explain that to us. So
yeah, no problem. And a lot of people have said that. And that's why I was like, okay, I probably could have gone a little harder on it.
Well, Rachel, we love to end our discussions by asking the authors that come chat with us, what are you currently reading and loving, or would you recommend to the group for us to check out?
Yeah, so I actually right now I am reading, I'm on like a cozy mystery binge, I think, because my own books are so not cozy. So I have been blowing my way through the Royal Spinus series by Rhys Bowen. They are so cute. They're about an aristocratic girl in the 1930s. She's 34th in line to the throne, but she's broke. And so she starts a job basically as like a maid in London, and she keeps trying to hide it from like her relatives who are royals. And in doing this, she gets involved in various high society murders and must solve them. They're just really fun. And it's one of those things where they're quick reads. There's like 12, 15 books in the series, something like that. So you can kind of gobble them up. What else have I been reading lately? I'm really excited for Lucy Foley's new one because I love Lucy Foley. So I'm really excited for The Paris Apartment. And if you liked Reckless Girls, Lucy Clark, who I mentioned earlier, has a book out called The Castaways. That's a sort of similar vibe, definitely, with Deserted Island and that kind of thing. And she also has a new one coming out this summer called Just One of the Girls, or not Just One of the Girls. Oh gosh, that's gonna drive me crazy. It's like that though. But it's coming out in June. Lucy Clark, it's Clark with an E. And it's about a group of women going on what they call in Britain a hen night, but a bachelorette party in Greece. And we know that one of them doesn't come home, but which one? So it's very cool. So yeah, those are all good things.
Okay, fantastic. I will get the title for that upcoming Lucy Clark.
Thank you.
So where can we find you on socials?
Right now, I am just on Twitter and Instagram. I am at Lady Hawkins on both of those. I have a new website being built as we speak. And so obviously when that is done, that will go up on my Twitter. So.
Well, fantastic. Rachel, thank you so much for coming and chatting with us tonight. We really appreciate your time, and we're going to get those recommendations out to everybody so that we can check out what you're reading and loving. Perfect. And we wish you so much success. We cannot wait to read the companion to the Xhex and then see what comes out in 2023 thriller-wise from you.
Yeah, well, thank you. This was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.
No, our pleasure. We appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Thanks for coming.